Good morning. Today we are going to read another story out of the Bible, but first I wanted to talk about where that story is if you were to look at your Bible at home. So to help, I have a bookshelf. And this bookshelf, you can see, it has 3 rows on it. The Bible is actually not just one book, but it's actually a collection of 66 different books. And you might know it's broken up into 2 parts. There's an Old Testament, which tells the story of God and his people Israel. And then there's a New Testament, which tells about Jesus and about the church after Jesus died, rose again, and ascended into heaven. So on this bookshelf, we have the Old Testament up here and here. You can see there are a whole lot of books in the Old Testament, and some of them are really, really big. But down here we have the New Testament, and it's quite a bit shorter. You'll also notice that the books are different colors. Now, if you open up your Bible at home, you're not going to find books with different colored pages. But it shows that the books in the Bible are different. They do different things. These first 5 are orange. They are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And they tell the story of creation and of God's first dealings with the first people, all the way up through Moses and his message to the people Israel before they went into the Promised Land. Then we have these books that are light blue. They tell the history of the nation of Israel, starting with Joshua, who leads them into the Promised Land, all the way through Esther, girl power. Then after that, we have these purple books. Those are books of wisdom, and there are only 5: Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And look how big the book of Psalms is. It's long and it has lots and lots of poems and songs written by people that some of the people we know in the Old Testament, like King David. And then these pink books are all the books of the prophets. Books like Isaiah, that talks 700 years before Jesus was born about some of the things about Jesus, all the way up through Malachi. Then Malachi finishes up about 150 years before Jesus was born. And then we have the New Testament. And you can see those books are different colors also. Here we have these 4 books, these kind of dark yellow color. And they are Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first books in the New Testament are Gospels because they tell us good news. They tell us the story of Jesus. They're written by people who knew him, who lived with him, who traveled with him, or they are written like with Mark and Luke. Mark and Luke were very good friends of Jesus. And so they wrote down everything that they heard. Then this green book is the Acts of the Apostles. And it tells the story of the church when it's first beginning. Right after Jesus goes into heaven, the Acts of the Apostles tell how the apostles, Jesus' first followers, go and tell all over that part of the world, tell people about Jesus and start churches. And then we have these yellow books right here. These yellow books are letters. They're letters that Paul wrote, or Peter wrote, which is right here, or John wrote, or James, and some of them we're not sure who wrote it. But they are letters that tell people how to live as followers of Jesus. And then the last book here that's read is the Revelation. And that's a vision that St. John had about Jesus coming back, which is something that we say every Sunday. Jesus has died, Jesus has risen, Jesus will come again. So, what we're going to do is read a story out of the storybook, and it's going to be about Jesus. And you can find that story, I'll show you here in just a moment. You can find that story in 3 of the Gospels. You can find it in Matthew, and in Mark, and in Luke. Lots of people saw what happened, and these 3 people wrote it down and spread the word to other people about it. So you can find that story in all 3 of those Gospels. So now I'm going to move this. I'll hold up the storybook and bring this over so you can see it a little better. And then we'll start. Okay, so it's called Filled Full. And you can see up there at the top, it's about the feeding of the 5,000. So it also tells you that it's in Matthew 14 and in Mark 6 and in Luke 9. Those numbers are the chapters of those books. So if you were to turn in your Bible at home to the book of Matthew and look for the big 14, in that part of it you would find this story. And same with the 6th chapter of Mark and the 9th chapter of Luke. We're going to read it out of the Bible storybook. So there were once 5,000 tired and hungry and probably very grumpy people sitting on a hillside. I'm going to have to lean over and read upside down. Sitting on a hillside, wanting their dinner. I know that feeling. They'd come to hear Jesus that day. They came before breakfast, stayed all morning, all afternoon, and way past dinner. No one had meant to be out there that long, but that's how it was, listening to Jesus. As if time didn't exist. People could listen to Jesus for hours, and on this particular day, that's just what they did. But they hadn't brought enough food, and they couldn't just go and buy themselves a burger and fries to go because, of course, they were in the middle of nowhere with no shops or restaurants, and besides, that kind of food wasn't invented yet. So what would they do? Jesus' friends had an idea. Let's send everyone home for dinner. Which isn't a bad idea. Where are they going to go? Do you think Jesus thinks that that's the right thing to do for them? Or do you think Jesus has something else in mind? They don't need to go, Jesus said. You can give them something to eat. Now, did Jesus want them to travel all the way to town and buy food for everyone? Is that what he's telling his friends to do? Jesus' friends panicked. But we don't have enough money. What food do you have? Jesus asked. Go and see. Now, there was a little boy in the crowd. He had brought a lunch with him that his mother had made for him that morning. He looked at his 5 loaves, and they were actually not big loaves like you buy at the store, but 5 kind of round loaves about as big as your hand. 5 loaves and 2 fish. It wasn't much, not nearly enough for 5,000, but it was all he had. And what did the little boy do? He said, I have some. Jesus' friends, they laughed. They laughed when they saw his little lunch. That's not nearly enough, they said. But they were wrong. Jesus knew it didn't matter how much the little boy had. God would make it enough, more than enough. Jesus said, bring me what you have. And so the little boy gave Jesus his lunch. Jesus winked at the little boy and whispered in his ear, watch. How in the world will Jesus feed everyone with just that? Jesus' friends said, because they thought it was impossible. And without God, that is impossible. But Jesus knew the one who made all the fish in the oceans. And Jesus knew the one who, in the very beginning, had made everything out of nothing at all. How hard would something like this be for someone like that? How hard? Not hard. Jesus took the little boy's lunch. He looked up to heaven, and he thanked his Father. Then Jesus gave the little lunch back to his friends. As Jesus' friends started to hand out the food, do you know what? It was the strangest thing. No matter how much they broke off, there was always more, and more, and more. Enough for 5,000. Everyone ate as much as they wanted. I just had dinner. I ate a whole lot. And there were probably some in that crowd that ate a whole lot that day. So everyone ate as much as they wanted. Second helpings, third helpings, even fourths, until they were full. And still, there were leftovers. Well, Jesus did many miracles like this. Things people thought couldn't happen, that weren't natural, because they weren't. But it was the most natural thing in all the world. It's what God had been doing from the very beginning, of course. Taking the nothing and making it everything. Taking the emptiness and filling it up. Taking the darkness and making it light. Have a great week.